So picture this scenario. It's like late on a Tuesday night.
Right.
You're sitting at your kitchen table. The house is totally quiet. And the only light in the room is just the glow of your phone. You're scrolling through a real estate app, just swiping past house after house, when suddenly you see it.
The dream home.
Exactly. It's got the right neighborhood, the perfect wraparound porch, the exact open layout you've been obsessing over. But right across the main photo is this banner, 2 words, coming soon.
Yeah, and you immediately feel that rush.
Oh, absolutely. Your heart rate bunks up a little bit.
Yeah.
You tap the heart icon, you hit save, you eagerly register your email so you get notified the second it officially hits the market. Because, you think you are shopping for a house, but the reality,
You are being shopped.
it completely flips your perspective,
Yeah.
honestly. Once you realize the actual mechanics operating behind that screen, in that specific moment sitting at the kitchen table, you aren't the consumer at all. You are the inventory. And that structural shift, that's our mission for this deep dive. Because we have this eye-opening stack of sources on the table today to unpack how the real estate industry has basically fundamentally rewired itself.
Yeah, and we're looking at some really solid evidence here.
We really are. We're drawing on recent public industry announcements, transcripts from real estate CEO earnings calls, and some highly specialized market intelligence. Specifically, we're looking at the SEER team data.
Right, which is incredibly detailed.
It really is. It meticulously tracks 41 school districts and 977 distinct neighborhoods across Pennsylvania and Delaware.
And that level of localized, granular data is just crucial for a deep dive like this. It allows us to, look past the slick national marketing narratives. We can actually examine the day-to-day mechanics of how homes are being listed, tracked, and fundamentally leveraged in local communities.
Okay, let's unpack this. Before we get into the whole coming soon phenomenon, we need to establish a baseline. Like, what does it actually mean to have a functional market?
Well, in a strict economic sense, a market requires 3 fundamental elements. First, you need assets that can be exchanged.
Right.
Second, you need participants who are capable of transacting. And third, you need rules that govern that exchange to ensure it functions smoothly. But the absolute defining feature, like the non-negotiable core of any market, is that a transaction must actually be possible.
Meaning you can actually buy the thing.
Exactly. If a transaction is strictly prohibited by the rules of the system, whatever you are participating in, well, it is simply not a market.
Which brings us directly back to that coming soon listing on your app.
Yeah.
Because it looks like available inventory. It feels like available inventory, right?
Yeah, it's got everything you'd expect to see.
Right. It's got a high-definition photo gallery, the square footage, the property tax history. You can search it, save it, text a link to your partner, but you literally cannot buy it.
You can't, because under the rules of the multiple listing service, the MLS, in most regions, a home in coming soon status cannot be shown to prospective buyers. You can't get a physical tour.
Wow, so you can't even step inside.
Nope. Furthermore, no offer can be accepted in the normal course of business because no qualified buyer has been allowed inside the property to inspect it. And crucially, the days on market clock, that ticking timer that tells buyers how stale a listing is getting, that is completely paused.
Oh, that's huge.
It is. By definition and by rule, it is pre-market.
So it occupies all the visual and emotional space of available housing,
Yeah.
but it possesses 0 of the mechanical properties of a transactable asset. It's like walking past a beautifully designed bakery window.
Okay, I like this analogy.
Right. You see this incredible cake sitting right there on the display stand. You walk up to the door, wallet in hand, completely ready to buy, but the door is literally dead-bolted.
Right.
But here's the twist. Every single time you press your face against that glass to look at the cake, the bakery is secretly recording your eye movements.
Right.
They're noting exactly how many seconds you lingered on the frosting, and then they're selling that behavioral profile to an advertiser.
That bakery analogy perfectly captures the underlying economics here. Because if you can't buy the cake, but the bakery is somehow generating record profits, we have to ask, what is actually being traded?
Exactly.
The physical house is merely the bait. The actual product being traded is the buyer's attention.
So let's break down how that attention is actually monetized, because I think about the actions you take on that app. Every single click on a coming soon listing is a data point, right?
Absolutely. Every time you hit save, that's a measurable signal of intent.
Yeah, every share, every minute you dwell on the 3D tour, every return visit, and especially that moment you register for those notify me when active alerts. None of these are casual, anonymous
No,
interactions.
they are highly engineered, deeply valuable behavioral metrics. The digital platforms basically aggregate those behaviors to build a high-resolution profile of your purchasing intent.
So they know exactly what you want before you even talk to anyone.
Right. And they use those engagement metrics to calibrate the initial pricing of the home, testing the waters before the official market clock even starts. But more profitably, they use your behavior to identify you as a high-intent, ready-to-move buyer.
So once the algorithm flags that you are, say, desperate for a four-bedroom house in that specific school district, they bundle your contact information and your search parameters.
Yes.
And then they sell that profile to lead generation services, who then turn around and sell it to real estate agents,
Yeah.
often for a really hefty referral fee or a massive percentage of their eventual commission.
Yeah.
So the digital platform that captures your attention is the actual marketplace.
Spot on. The data brokers and the lead buying agents are the paying customers. We are essentially looking at a system where the seller's house has been temporarily removed from the transaction economy to serve as raw material for the attention economy.
That is just wild. So if the transaction market has basically been hijacked, we need to look at how this new attention harvesting machine actually operates in practice, because the sources detail a very specific architecture used by the largest national brokerages to maximize this extraction.
They do. They utilize what essentially functions as a three-phase pipeline. And understanding the mechanics of this pipeline is really the key to seeing how the entire industry has been rewired.
Okay, so walk us through it.
Sure. So the architecture is designed to extract maximum value at every possible stage before the house ever sees the light of the true public market. The first phase is entirely internal.
We like internal to just the one company.
Exactly. The listing is kept locked inside the brokerage's closed network.
And we're talking about, what, office exclusives? Internal Slack channels?
Yeah, Slack channels or proprietary software where only agents working for that specific massive brokerage can even see the upcoming property. The primary function of this internal phase is to test pricing in a controlled environment without any public risk.
Oh, I see. So if a seller wants to shoot for, like, an aspirational price,
The brokerage floats it internally first. If they price it way too high and nobody in the network bites, the public never even knows.
because the official days on market clock hasn't started.
Right. And the listing doesn't get stigmatized as being overpriced. They get to calibrate the financial target using exclusive internal feedback.
Wow. Okay, so once they've stress tested the price, the property moves to the second phase, which is that coming soon era we've been talking about, right?
Yep. The listing is finally syndicated, but usually only to select portals. It's out there to harvest engagement at a massive scale.
This is where they collect all the clicks, saves, and dwells from the general public.
Exactly. The property looks fresh and urgent to the public, even though the brokerage has already been quietly shopping it around internally for weeks.
That is so deceptive. And then what's the third phase?
We finally arrive at the open market. The listing hits the broader multiple listing service and becomes widely transactable. But the critical mechanical detail here is that the property only hits the public MLS after the brokerage has systematically extracted the maximum possible value from the attention pipeline.
By the time the average buyer is even legally allowed to put an offer in, the pricing has already been calibrated by the internal tests, the buyer pool has been pre-filtered, and the lead data has been monetized.
That's the reality of it.
But wait a second, let me play devil's advocate here.
Yeah.
If I'm selling my house, a soft launch actually sounds like an amazing strategy. Like I'm sitting down with my agent and they're explaining how a coming soon period is going to build massive hype, create this sort of velvet rope effect, and drive up urgency before the official clock even starts ticking.
Right, sounds great on paper.
Honestly, why wouldn't I want that? It sounds like a premium marketing tool tailored to get me the highest possible bid.
And it is entirely logical that a seller would embrace that narrative because it is an incredibly persuasive pitch. I mean, agents are extensively trained on these exact marketing materials, and many genuinely believe they are offering a cutting-edge service to their clients.
Yeah, because the velvet rope effect is a really powerful psychological trigger.
It is. But when we strip away the marketing and look at the actual data, specifically that SIR team hyper-localized tracking across those Pennsylvania and Delaware counties, the reality of the outcomes paints a very different picture.
Okay, let's dig into that data. What actually happens to the final sale price when a house goes through this whole extended pre-market hype machine?
The data reveals that properties subjected to these extended pre-market phases do not, on average, outperform properties listed directly to the open market.
Wait, really? No difference.
Right. Sellers do not secure a statistically significant premium on their final closing price because of a coming soon period. The financial outcome for the seller remains remarkably similar to just a direct MLS listing. The primary difference is that the seller has simply extended the total amount of time the property is tied up in a non-transactable state.
So the seller doesn't actually get a premium, and the buyer is locked out while being mined for data. That really just leaves the agent, and they think they're wielding this sophisticated marketing tool on behalf of their client.
Yeah, but here's the thing. The architecture of the pipeline requires a steady stream of inventory to function, right? The agent signs the listing agreement and dutifully feeds that property into the brokerage's system. The agent believes they are using the tool to generate buzz. But the mechanical truth is that the agent is the tool being used by the phase. The pipeline harvests the attention, and the upstream beneficiaries, like the massive brokerages, the digital portals, the data aggregators, they collect the systemic value, while the local agent and the seller just absorb the delays.
That's incredible. But if these massive brokerages are keeping all this inventory inside their own walled gardens to extract the value first, how are the big internet search portals reacting to this?
That's a great question.
Because their entire multi-billion-dollar business model relies on having the most comprehensive, open access to listings to draw in traffic. If the brokerages are hoarding the bait, the portals should be fighting this tooth and nail.
And they absolutely were fighting it, which makes the recent public industry announcements we reviewed so revealing. Because the industry isn't hiding this structural shift in back rooms. They are detailing the transition in plain sight on earnings calls with their institutional investors.
Well, we definitely have to talk about the brokerage CEO's earnings call from early May.
Yes.
Because the chief executive of one of the largest residential real estate brokerages in the country literally told his investors that he expects 80% of his company's listings to go through this coming soon phase.
80%. I mean, targeting 80% of your inventory for pre-market routing is not a niche marketing tactic for luxury homes. That is a wholesale structural replacement of the open market.
Yeah, and when he was pressed by investors about the traditional rules of the MLS, the very rules designed to mandate a transparent, level playing field, his response was highly dismissive.
Very much so.
He explicitly stated, MLS rules are just rules of a business, they're private entities. He didn't view consumer protection transparency rules as a public mandate at all, but just as an optional corporate policy he could simply outmaneuver.
And he went even further. He announced plans to take a regional MLS and expand it nationally to actively compete against the local MLSs that try to enforce those open market rules.
The framing is what really matters there, I think, because the largest brokerages are publicly declaring that the traditional open market is merely an inconvenience to their internal pipelines.
Yeah.
They are signaling to Wall Street that this transition is no longer theoretical.
Exactly. Which brings us back to the search portals. In May, the two biggest real estate search portals in the country, companies that have been, frankly, bitter, entrenched rivals for years, they suddenly announced they're going to start sharing pre-market listings across both of their platforms this summer.
Which is a huge reversal.
Yeah.
Because historically, one of these portals took a really hardline stance against pre-market listings. They argued that coming soon statuses fragmented the market and hurt consumers, positioning themselves as the defenders of open access.
Yep. And the other portal was far more permissive, allowing agents to upload pre-market inventory directly. But now they're syndicating that exclusive inventory to each other.
And naturally, their public relations teams spun this as a massive transparency win. They claimed that since pre-market listings are happening anyway in the current environment, they have a consumer responsibility to ensure everyone can see them.
Well, the underlying economics of a portal dictate their behavior. We have to remember, they do not sell houses.
No, they don't.
They sell advertising space, and high intent leads to real estate professionals. To maintain their advertising rates, they require an astronomical volume of user traffic. And pre-market listings, with their paused clocks and exclusive allure, well, those are the ultimate traffic generators.
So the portals basically realized they were fighting a losing battle against the brokerage's pipelines.
Precisely. They are no longer competing on whether to host pre-market inventory, because refusing to host it just means losing the user traffic to a competitor. So they have reorganized their business models to ensure they capture the attention market traffic.
Which perfectly contextualizes the vanishing lawsuit.
Oh, yes.
Because there was a high-stakes, highly publicized legal battle between one of the major portals and a massive brokerage precisely over this issue. The portal had actively blocked listings that the brokerage was pre-marketing elsewhere, trying to force all inventory onto the open market simultaneously.
But then earlier this year, the lawsuit simply evaporated.
Just poof, gone.
There was no landmark court ruling setting a legal precedent. There was no massive publicized settlement dictating new industry rules. They just quietly stopped litigating.
Because high-stakes corporate litigation does not simply vanish unless the underlying economic conflict has been resolved.
Yeah.
Both sides realized the attention pipeline was just too profitable to dismantle.
Right. The brokerage secured the right to maintain its pre-market visibility and test its pricing. And the portal secured access to the engagement-heavy coming soon listings to drive its lead generation engine.
So the architecture of the deal satisfied both corporate entities, while a consumer, the actual buyer trying to navigate the market, was entirely absent from the negotiating table. The buyer is literally just the fuel for the engine they agreed to share.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we have to examine what happens to the traditional open market. Like, what is the fate of the local MLS when 80% of a home's attention value and the corresponding lead generation revenue is systematically extracted before the house is ever officially listed?
It creates a massive imbalance.
Yeah.
We're looking at a textbook case of information asymmetry.
Exactly.
You have one side of the transaction, the brokerages and portals, holding this massive trove of behavioral data, internal pricing feedback, and pre-filtered buyer intent. And on the other side, you have the general public relying on the MLS, assuming they are seeing the whole picture. When information asymmetry becomes that deeply entrenched, the open marketplace just hollows out.
Because the MLS was originally conceived to level that playing field, ensuring every buyer and every seller had access to the same fundamental information at the exact same time. But as the pipeline diverts the highest value interactions upstream, the MLS fundamentally changes its function.
Right. It effectively becomes a market of last resort. Like, think about the life cycle of a blockbuster movie back in the days of physical media.
Okay, I'm following.
The film releases in theaters, capturing the highest-paying, most eager audience and generating hundreds of millions of dollars. Then it moves to premium pay-per-view, extracting millions more from the next tier of consumers. Then it hits the standard streaming services. By the time the physical DVD ends up in a, $5 discount bin near the checkout counter at a big box store, every single ounce of premium value has already been squeezed out of the product.
Yeah.
The MLS is turning into that discount bin. It's simply the final destination where the listing is deposited after the pipeline has completely finished monetizing the attention.
The discount bin analogy is stark, but the internal evidence entirely supports it. And, the most compelling validation of the structural shift isn't coming from outside consumer advocates or academic critics. The dissent is coming from the very top of the industry itself.
Yeah, that was fascinating to see. In early May, the founder of one of the largest residential brokerage networks in the country published a video issuing a really stark warning to his own peers.
He did.
He explicitly argued that these private pre-listing strategies are actively undermining the multiple listing service. And he is actually the one who introduced the exact phrase, market of last resort, to describe the trajectory of the MLS.
Right. And for a major industry voice, someone whose entire enterprise relies on the profitability of real estate transactions, to publicly sound the alarm indicates just how profound the shift is. He warned that agents on the ground might be operating under a financial and technological structure they haven't even been fully briefed on.
He argued that real estate professionals have a fiduciary obligation to explain the true trade-offs of these pre-marketing strategies to their clients. Sellers need to understand who is actually benefiting from the delayed market entry.
Exactly. He wasn't arguing that sellers shouldn't have choices. He was questioning whether agents even comprehend the architecture of the tools they're pushing. Because, let's be real, he gains no financial advantage by fabricating a warning that criticizes his own industry's most profitable new pipeline.
No, not at all.
The internal pushback highlights the friction between the traditional role of a real estate agent and the new reality of this digital architecture. Many agents genuinely want to serve their clients' best interests, but they are utilizing a tech stack designed by corporations whose primary fiduciary duty is to their shareholders' data revenue.
Which brings us all back to you, sitting at your kitchen table, scrolling through that app in the quiet of the night. The implications of this deep dive fundamentally alter how you have to view the landscape.
They really do.
Because historically, despite all its flaws and friction, the multiple listing service functioned essentially as public infrastructure. It had public transparency requirements, standardized rules, and a mandate to facilitate open exchange built into its very DNA.
But what has steadily replaced it is an attention market built entirely on private infrastructure. This new ecosystem is governed not by public rules or a mandate for fair exchange, but by hidden algorithms specifically optimized to maximize your digital engagement, route your behavioral data, and package your intent for sale.
Yeah, so when you look at the screen on your phone, you see houses waiting to be bought. When a seller signs a listing contract, they see a savvy, exclusive marketing strategy designed to maximize their return. When the agent uploads the glossy photos with the "Coming Soon" banner, they see themselves providing a premium, modern service. But the digital architecture operating beneath all of those assumptions is built to serve a completely different master.
Which means the ultimate takeaway for anyone navigating this space is a shift in the questions you ask.
Right.
When you enter the real estate market today, the primary question is no longer just, is my agent helpful, or is this a solid marketing strategy? The critical foundational question must be, who at the table is operating under a legal fiduciary duty to your specific interests, and who is operating under a structural duty to feed the pipeline?
Because it completely reorients how you interact with digital platforms. Which leaves us with one final thought to mull over as we wrap up today. If the single largest, most consequential financial asset most people will ever purchase in their lifetime, a home, has been quietly transformed into just another piece of clickbait designed to harvest your data and package your intent, well, what other foundational markets in our daily lives are actually just attention pipelines in disguise? Think about the architecture beneath the screen the next time you find yourself scrolling at the kitchen table.